You're watching Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Julia Kim. These are the headlines on the continent. Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo wins re-election, the incumbent claiming a narrow victory over longtime opponent John Mahama. The largely peaceful poll, though, was marred by the deaths of 5 people in election-related violence. And telling the often untold stories of Germany's colonial past, our correspondents report on the efforts of researchers and activists to make this information available to future generations of Germans. We begin in Ghana, where incumbent President Nana Akufo-Addo has won a second 4-year term in office. It was a tightly contested election, with the centre-right leader taking 51.6% of the vote. His centre-left rival and predecessor, John Mahama, took 47.4%. 275 seats in Parliament were also on the ballot. Those results yet to be announced, but both candidates' parties claim to have a slim lead. And though observers hailed the polls as largely peaceful, 5 people died in election-related violence. France 24's Sam Bradpeace has been covering the elections for us.
Can't really say that the election was definitely going to Akufo-Addo. Most analysts that we spoke to before the polls opened said that simply the race would be too close to call. And when you actually look at the results, you can see that Akufo-Addo, I should say, only won by 4 percentage points. That was in contrast to 9 percentage points back in 2016. So you can see his lead really narrowed there. Now, election analysts will make their own kind of dissections of the results in the coming days and weeks. But really, you can look at a couple of reasons as to why his lead closed this time around. Partly, in all likelihood, I should say, because of his free SHS policy. This was an introduction of a policy to increase high school attendance. Ghana has a very young population, but the numbers of students able to attend high school through government aid essentially has increased by 50% since 2017. So that was an incredibly popular policy. Another very strong point for Akufo-Addo going into these polls. His handling of the coronavirus pandemic. Many people, well, he won plaudits among most Ghanaians that we spoke to for his handling of the pandemic, balancing the economic risk with the public health risk. He seemed to strike a good balance, which won the support, seemingly, of most Ghanaians.
Now, of course, on the whole, the vote has gone smoothly, if we're going to take observers' word for it. But there have been some issues. Tell us about some of the questions that have been raised during these polls.
Yes, undoubtedly there have been issues. For a start, we were expecting the results at 5 p.m. on Tuesday. We're now Wednesday, and we've only just got the results in. So that was one of the issues. But perhaps more importantly, certainly more importantly, at least 5 people were killed in electoral violence, according, that is, to the National Police. In at least one of these incidents, there were tens of incidents across the country, security forces actually fired on people at a vote counting station. So undoubtedly, one of the first priorities for this Akufo-Addo government will be simply to restore a sense of calm in the country. Ghana has known an incredible kind of, it's held up really as a beacon of stability within the West African region. And so really this time around, they will be keen to maintain that trend and not let the country slide into any form of chaos. The history since 1992, the introduction of multi-party democracy, suggests that that would not be the case. But again, the number one priority in the short term, at least for this government, will be to restore a sense of calm and maintain the Ghanaian faith in the democratic system.
Well, 76-year-old Nana Akufo-Addo was born in Accra, educated in London, and trained as a lawyer in Paris. But his passion for human rights eventually led him to politics. France 24's Laurent Berstecker tells us more about his rise to Ghana's top office.
Born in a prestigious political family, Nana Akufo-Addo soon began to nurture political ambitions of his own. In the 1970s, his pro-democracy ideals saw him declared persona non grata in Ghana, forcing him to flee to the UK, where he continued to criticize the excesses of his country's military rulers. After returning to Ghana, Akufo-Addo joined the NPP Liberal Party in the early 90s. In 2001, he entered government under the presidency of John Kufuor, who named him Justice Minister before transferring him to the Foreign Affairs Department in 2005. In 2007, Akufo-Addo stepped down as foreign minister in order to run for president, but the NPP candidate was defeated by John Adam Mills in a tight electoral contest. Akufo-Addo tried again in 2012, this time losing to John Mahama. Yet he refused to give up, and in 2016 his third attempt saw him elected president of the republic at 72 years old. Akufo-Addo has since attempted to liberalize Ghana's economy by cutting taxes for corporations while launching large factory construction projects to develop alternatives to agriculture. His policies led to years of positive growth, yet critics say they've largely benefited the rich while failing to lift Ghanaians out of poverty.
Well, earlier we spoke to Franklin Kujo, founding president of Imani Africa, a public policy think tank. I started by asking him what are the main challenges facing President Akufo-Addo.
One of the most important challenges that the president faces is his fight against corruption, because he was quite lucky, though. I mean, corruption became a hot issue almost 3 weeks into the election. The government has been perceived to be nepotistic, has been perceived to be quite corrupt. And those issues sadly did not reflect in the electoral results. So corruption will be one of the biggest issues that the president needs to face with when he assumes power again on January 7, 2021.
I wanted to also bring your attention to the fact that there are 5 people that have been killed in election-related violence. And these elections have been really seen as testing Ghana's credentials as one of the continent's most politically stable countries. How would you describe how these elections have been carried out?
We've had incidents of persons armed with guns who were more or less being riotous and disorderly. But I did not think that the security services themselves would have opened fire on the persons who had been killed. I think that's a low moment. And yes, it's a security issue that ought to be dealt with. But it was actually foreseen anyway. I mean, I'm not sure that this would mar the entirety of the elections itself. But Ghanaians were largely peaceful.
Now, as you say, Ghanaians largely peaceful, and Ghana has had 7 peaceful transitions of power. How has it been able to succeed so consistently in this peaceful power transfer process where most of its neighbors, it seems, have failed?
Well, one of the most important cardinals of this Ghanaian election has been the idea of a peace pact, which one of civil society organization called Institute for Democratic Governance had been credited with bringing all these contending candidates to the table to sign a peace pact of sorts, that they will not resort to violence however the elections go. And so that has created this rather stable outlook for Ghana. But generally, Ghanaians, because of our interrelatedness, plus marriage and education, largely people go to different regions to get educated. I think there's been some inculturation of these rather interesting, peaceable, if you like, peaceful coexistence.
Well, as conflict continues in Ethiopia's north, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is south of the border in Kenya to promote cross-border trade. It's his first foreign trip since launching a military campaign against the dissident Tigray region. Abiy made no mention of what the UN's described as a situation, quote, spiraling out of control. Thousands are thought to have been killed and almost 1 million people displaced by the violence. Instead, Abiy and President Uhuru Kenyatta focused on the economy, touting the remote border town of Moyale as the future Dubai of the region. And finally, in Germany, few school children know the full story of how former German colonies won their independence. From 1884 to the end of World War I, Germany ruled over large parts of modern-day Togo, Cameroon, Tanzania, Burundi, Rwanda and Namibia. But change is afoot. Researchers are making more resources available for future generations of German students. This report from our correspondents.
In this Hamburg high school, the colonial past is anything but a taboo subject. These students are studying the German Empire's genocide of the Herero and Nama people and the unresolved question of reparation.
It also has to do with the restitution of artworks in particular.
It's a 6-month project started by teachers, and they decide how to teach the history of the German colonies.
Quite often, the official history is very white. For example, it is very hard to find any other points of view in our teaching materials.
But this course is an exception. Many Germans leave school with no real knowledge of the colonial past. To fill in the gaps, the History Museum in Berlin has overhauled its exhibition on colonialism.
Here we see a lot of the stereotypes and racism of the period that have never really been called into question.
And so it's producing teaching materials to change that.
What happened in the 19th century still has consequences. The borders that were drawn, the consequences of post-colonial migration from the African continent, for instance.
In the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement, a petition went around calling on schools to teach about Germany's colonial era, a move supported by researchers to help better understand 20th century German history.
Certain racial policies of the Third Reich, for example, stem from what happened in the colonies. The first so-called German racial state was created in Southwest Africa.
For long little known or hidden, the time seems to have come for Germany's colonial past to enter the history books.
Well, that's it from us. There's more news coming up. Stay tuned to France 24.
I'm Natalie Savaricas, and you'll usually find me in news, reporting on Greece's enduring financial turmoil and protests, but also the refugee emergency, here on France 24.
Natalie Savaricas, one of the 200 France 24 correspondents around the world. France 24, a different point of view.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.
The world is ever changing. The news doesn't wait. That's why at France 24, we'll always be there to help make sense of world events. For the best international coverage, 24 hours a day, no matter what, France 24 is with you everywhere, all the time.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.